Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on exactly where you're plugging in from today.
Or good evening.
Right, or good evening. Today is Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. And if you've been anywhere near a news feed in the last, I don't know, 96 hours, you know exactly why we are dropping this deep dive right now.
Yeah, we are literally watching history unfold in real time.
It's incredible.
It's a totally pivotal moment. I mean, we are looking at the fourth consecutive day of just massive, synchronized student protests across universities all over Iran.
And the footage coming out it's intense.
It is. From Tehran to Tabriz, the reports are chaotic, but they are very consistent. We're seeing chants directly against Supreme Leader Khamenei. We are seeing, pretty brutal crackdowns by the besieged forces. And we're seeing a level of unrest that just feels, well, it feels different this time.
It really does feel different because the stakes feel so much higher and the cracks in the system they just seem wider. And that is exactly what we are here to talk about with you today.
Exactly.
We aren't just reacting to the breaking news. We're doing a deep dive into a very specific, very ambitious, and honestly an incredibly detailed roadmap that claims to predict exactly how this whole thing ends.
Right. And we're looking at source material that is just fascinating because it isn't just your standard political commentary. It's an actual blueprint.
Yeah.
It's a series of blog posts, video transcripts, and strategic documents, all collectively titled Barak Face, the Best Possible Strategy for Iran. And it's written by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat.
Okay, and Barak Face, I just have to stop you right there for a second.
The title.
That title, it sounds like some internet meme from 2008. But once you actually open the document, you realize this is not a joke at all. This is basically a mega engineering project for a nation.
It really is. When we say blueprint, we mean it literally includes a draft for an interim constitution.
Which is wild.
Right. It includes a specific geopolitical strategy for handling Russia and China. It even has advice on which types of renewable energy to pitch to the American president. It is a completely comprehensive manual for regime change.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to unpack that manual. We are trying to figure out how this source proposes to move a country of 85 million people from a theocratic autocracy to a federal democracy without, turning it into a chaotic, failed state.
Which is always the nightmare scenario, right? I mean, we have seen Libya, we've seen the aftermath of Iraq.
Yeah.
The fear is always the vacuum that gets left behind. And this source argues that you can avoid that vacuum and it is a massive if you do the homework first.
So let's open up the diagnosis part of this, section 1 of our stack today, the glass giant versus Jupiter's gas.
This is really compelling contrast the source makes right off the bat. It's essentially a material science analogy applied to political science.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, on one side, you have the regime, which he calls the glass giant. It looks imposing, it towers over the entire region, but it's fundamentally rigid.
Why glass, though? Why not say, like, iron or steel?
Because of ductility.
Yeah.
Steel bends, right? It absorbs shock. Glass is very hard, but it's incredibly brittle.
Ah, I see.
The source argues that the Islamic Republic is built on this totally rigid ideology. It cannot bend. If it admits it was wrong about the hijab or the economy or its foreign policy, the whole theological structure just collapses.
Right.
Because it cannot bend, it cannot absorb the shock of these protests. If you hit it with the right frequency, it doesn't just crack, it shatters entirely.
And that shattering is what we might literally be seeing on our screens right now. But contrast that with the other metaphor the author uses, Jupiter's gas.
Yeah, this is where the source gets almost poetic about the potential of the nation itself. Not the government, but Iran, the country, the people, the deep history. He compares it to Jupiter.
Like the actual planet. The literal planet. Think about it. Jupiter is massive. It has immense gravity. It is just swirling with potential energy. The source argues that Iran is materially and culturally just incredibly rich.
Right. They have the world's second largest natural gas reserves.
Exactly. Massive oil deposits, a highly, highly educated population. It has the natural gravity to be a regional superpower.
But currently, that engine is stalled out.
Right. It's like an engine built for high performance, but it's running with sand in the gears.
And the regime is the same.
The sand is the regime. The sand is the ideology. It's the prioritization of theological purity over actual economic reality.
Yeah.
The source points out that right now, as we speak on February 24th, the regime is responding to students not with dialogue, because they structurally can't, but with straight-up violence. That is the reaction of a brittle system.
And the source mentions that the current diplomatic talks, the ones that have been dragging on for years and years, are failing because they're fundamentally flawed. Vagat argues you're starting with the wrong topic and you're talking to the wrong people. Exactly.
Yeah.
The traditional approach for the last 20 years has basically been, let's talk about nuclear centrifuges.
Right.
The source says, no, that's a symptom. If you want to fix the problem, you don't start with the nuclear program. You start with the fundamental nature of the regime itself. And you definitely don't talk to the mullahs, you talk to the people who are going to replace them.
Which brings us to a pretty heavy concept mentioned in the text, decapitation strikes.
Yes.
Now, just hearing that, it sounds incredibly aggressive, but the source frames it quite differently, right?
It's very nuanced, and we definitely need to be careful with the terminology here. The source isn't calling for some immediate war or a full-ground invasion. He's positioning this as a deterrent.
A deterrent against what?
Well, the argument is that the West, specifically the U.S. administration, needs to completely change the leverage equation.
Because right now, the main leverage is just economic sanctions. And who do sanctions actually hurt?
Exactly. They hurt the people. The price of chicken goes up, basic medicine becomes scarce. But the leadership, sitting in the palaces, they do just fine.
They're insulated.
Completely insulated.
Yeah.
The source argues that the threat needs to be personal and existential for the regime leadership themselves.
So if the regime starts killing peaceful protesters en masse, and the source mentions 30,000 as a historical precedent of what they are capable of, then the gloves come off.
Precisely. It shifts the entire dynamic from just containing Iran to actively transforming it. It's an ultimatum strategy.
Right.
The message to the regime leadership becomes, if you shoot the students, you personally become a target. But for an ultimatum like that to actually work, you need a viable alternative.
Because you can't just remove a government if there's nobody ready to pick up the phone the very next day.
Exactly.
And that leads us directly into section 2 of our deep dive, the untapped superpower. And he isn't talking about oil or uranium here. He is talking about the diaspora.
This is arguably one of the strongest points in the Bagat texts. He describes the Iranian diaspora as this massive, sleeping giant in its own right. We were talking about millions of people living outside of Iran.
And not just any people. We're talking about highly educated, highly successful professionals.
It's a staggering concentration of human capital. You have Silicon Valley engineers, top doctors in London, industrialists in Germany, academics in France.
Yeah.
In a lot of revolutions, you see a massive brain drain after the conflict. Iran has already had its brain drain. The brains are just waiting outside. The source views this not as a national tragedy, but as a savings account.
A savings account that's ready to be withdrawn.
Yes, exactly.
But in geopolitics, they are a mess, organizationally speaking.
Oh, they are completely fragmented. The source explicitly describes them as a mosaic of competing visions.
You've got the monarchists who want the Shah back.
Right. And you have the Republicans who want a strict secular democracy. You have leftists, you have Kurds, you have Balochis. And historically, they spend a lot of time just arguing with each other.
It honestly sounds like herding cats.
It is exactly like herding cats.
Ugh.
But the source makes a really firm argument here. He says this fragmentation is the single biggest hurdle. If they don't get their act together, the regime basically wins by default.
So what is his strategy to fix that? The source calls for an umbrella organization.
It's almost a corporate merger approach to a revolution. Step one is pure organization. Bagat is essentially saying, where is your umbrella organization?
Right.
He demands that every single person in the diaspora join an existing group. He doesn't even care which one, just join one.
Yeah.
And then all those separate small groups need to coalesce under one massive unified banner.
To form a government in waiting.
Yes. And this is totally crucial for you, the listener, to really grasp. This isn't just about organizing a protest rally in Los Angeles or Toronto.
No.
This is about forming a literal shadow cabinet, a group of people who can walk right into the ministries in Tehran the day the regime falls and actually know how to turn the lights back on.
Because if you don't have that pre-built, you get chaos. You get different militias or factions fighting for control of the ministries.
Exactly. The source is obsessed with preventing that chaos C outcome.
Yeah.
You want to go from autocracy A to democracy B.
Right.
You absolutely cannot pass through civil war C. And the only way to bypass that is to have the governmental structure ready before the fall even happens.
Let's talk about that structure then, because this is where the source gets very, very specific about who does what. Section 3. Symbols versus executive.
This is a really fascinating distinction. The source identifies two very distinct needs for any nation in transition. A need for unity and the need for management.
Unity and management. Okay, so who represents unity in this blueprint?
Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. The source identifies him as the primary unifying symbol. He is deeply linked to the lion and sun flag, that historical pre-revolutionary emblem of Persian identity.
But the source is very clear, and Pahlavi himself has been clear in real life that he doesn't actually want to run the country.
Correct. And this is a vital piece of the entire puzzle. The source describes him as a potential interim constitutional monarch. His job is to be the cultural anchor.
He's the flag personified.
Exactly. He is there to make the military feel comfortable about defecting, to make the more traditional factions feel safe. But he is not the CEO of the country.
So who is the CEO? Who is the, as the text calls it, the active interim prime minister?
That is the executive role. The prime minister is one who handles the cabinet, manages the economy, oversees the transition, does the messy day-to-day politics.
And there is a very interesting, somewhat bold detail in the source material here. In a comment on the blog, the author, Paramender Kumar Bhagat, actually suggests himself for a role.
He does. He implies a sort of partnership. Reza is the monarch. And he suggests something along the lines of, you should put together the umbrella organization and I'll become the interim prime minister.
Which really highlights the stark distinction between the two roles he envisions.
Definitely. One is a figurehead of continuity and historical legitimacy. The other is an active political operator getting their hands dirty.
It's a classic division of labor, head of state versus head of government.
Exactly. Think of the UK or Japan. But applying it in a highly volatile transitional context solves a huge problem.
How so?
Well, it allows the opposition to rally around a very recognizable symbol, the prince, without fearing that he's just going to become a new autocrat. Because the actual executive power lies with the prime minister and the technocratic cabinet.
And the source heavily emphasizes that this is temporary. This is strictly an interim setup.
Strictly transitional. The source says the people will ultimately decide. Eventually, there has to be a national referendum. Do you want a republic? Do you want a constitutional monarchy? But you obviously can't have that free and fair vote while the mullahs are still in charge. You need this structured interim period to stabilize the country first so the vote can actually happen.
Okay, so we have the people, meaning the diaspora, and we have the leadership structure. Now we need the actual rulebook. This brings us to Section 4, which is a deep dive into the interim constitution.
This was the part of the source material that really surprised me, honestly. Usually these kinds of manifestos are pretty vague.
Yeah, they usually just say, we want freedom, down with the dictator.
Exactly. But this source provides a full written draft text for an interim constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Let's unpack some of these articles because they are pretty radical for the region.
They really are. The preamble itself sets a very clear tone. It declares Iran a federal democracy under an interim constitutional monarchy. And that word federal is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting there.
Why is federal so important in the specific context of Iran?
Because Iran is not a monolith at all. You have Persians, yes, but you also have Azeris, Kurds, Balochis, Arabs, Lurs.
Right.
The current regime, and honestly even the previous monarchy under the Shah, was very heavily centralized. Everything ran directly through Tehran.
And extreme centralization usually breeds deep resentment out in the provinces.
Exactly. The Kurds often feel occupied. The Balochis feel totally neglected economically. The source argues for a brand new federal map. It mandates bringing in experts in geography and demography to actively decentralize power.
It's basically saying, let the regions breathe. Let them manage their own local affairs to some real extent.
Which is really the best antidote to separatism. If people feel represented and have autonomy over their local lives, they're far less likely to want to completely break away and form their own nation.
It keeps the country whole by actually loosening the grip.
Precisely.
So let's look at Article 1 of this drafted constitution. It establishes a strict 12-month timeline.
A ticking clock. This is very smart transition architecture. It says the interim government has 1 year, exactly 12 months, to organize nationwide elections for a permanent constituent assembly.
So it totally prevents the interim leaders from just getting too comfortable in the palaces.
Exactly. You are there to do a specific job, secure the country, and get out.
And there's a very specific structural quota mentioned for that new assembly.
Yes. 100 seats, which is roughly 1/3 of the total, are reserved specifically for women.
That is massive. In a region where women's rights are literally the flashpoint of the current revolution, I mean, remember the chant, woman, life, freedom.
Right.
Enshrining a 33% quota right in the interim constitution is a very bold structural guarantee.
It moves way beyond just having supportive slogans. It translates the energy of the protest into actual statutory power. It ensures that the people drafting the permanent constitution aren't just a room full of men again.
And then look at Article 2 regarding civil rights. It has your standard human rights, speech, assembly, all that. But there's one phrase that really stands out. The right to change one's religion.
That is currently a capital offense under the regime. Apostasy.
It is punishable by death right now.
Yes. So to explicitly protect the right to leave Islam or to convert to Christianity or the Baha'i faith or Zoroastrianism or to be an atheist, that is a fundamental massive break from the current theocratic legal structure.
It signals a completely secular legal framework where the state essentially has absolutely no say in your soul.
Exactly.
Then we get to Article 4, which is transitional justice. And this is always the hardest, messiest part of any regime change. What on earth do you do with the guys who were actively running the political prisons yesterday?
The source proposes a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a TRC. This is heavily modeled on what South Africa did after the fall of apartheid.
So not just throwing everyone in mass trials.
No. And the source is incredibly pragmatic here. It distinguishes clearly between the worst offenders, those who ordered or committed genocide, severe torture, systematic crimes,
Right.
and the lower-level functionaries who were just maybe following orders or acting under severe duress.
The worst offenders face actual trials, but the others get what?
Amnesty, rehabilitation, an off-ramp.
Why is that necessary, though? I mean, from an outsider's perspective, why not just put them all on trial for propping up the regime?
Because if you threaten to jail or execute every single person who ever drew a paycheck from the regime, they will fight you to the absolute death. You will trigger a civil war that could last a decade.
Yeah, you back them into a corner.
Exactly. You have to give the mid-level bureaucrat or the guy in the local besieged office who maybe isn't even a true ideological believer but just needs to feed his family a real reason to put down his weapon.
You have to tell him, if you stop right now, you actually have a future in the new Iran.
It's the classic golden bridge strategy. Leave your enemy a golden bridge to retreat across. It totally prevents the regime from fighting with its back completely against the wall.
Now, let's zoom out a bit. We've got the internal structure, the laws, the justice system, but Iran lives in a very tough neighborhood. Section 5, the deal of the century. This is about geopolitical realignment.
This is where the Barack phase strategy really tries to thread a very difficult, very narrow needle. It argues for a grand bargain that appeals to the United States, Russia, and China all simultaneously.
Which sounds nearly impossible. I mean, usually if you please Washington, you anger Moscow and vice versa. How does Bhagat argue you can actually please everyone?
By focusing purely on interests rather than ideology. Let's look at Russia and China first.
Yeah.
The source asks a basic question. What do they actually want from Iran? Do they care at all about the spread of the Islamic Revolution?
Obviously not. The source says the Chinese Communist Party doesn't even understand the Dalai Lama, let alone the Ayatollah's theology.
Right. They are essentially atheistic, incredibly pragmatic powers. Russia wants to sell weapon systems. China wants to buy cheap, reliable oil. That is the absolute beginning and end of their core interests in Tehran.
So the argument he's making is that a democratic, wealthy Iran is just a fundamentally better customer.
Exactly. A heavily sanctioned, economically poor Iran can only buy so much. A booming democratic Iran with all international sanctions lifted and double-digit economic growth, well, they can buy a lot more Russian defense systems. And they can export a lot more oil to China.
So the opposition basically needs to go to Moscow and Beijing and say, hey, we are better for your bottom line than the mullahs ever were.
It's incredibly cynical, honestly, but also very likely true. It's pure realpolitik. It removes the ideological barrier completely. It posits that Putin and Xi Jinping aren't loyal to Khamenei. They're only loyal to their own national interests.
And then there is the United States piece of the puzzle, specifically the Trump administration. The source makes a very direct, calculated appeal to Trump's desire for a massive historical legacy.
He does. The source says Trump can achieve literal Reagan status if he successfully facilitates this transition.
Right.
Just as Reagan is broadly credited with the fall of the Soviet Union, Trump could be the closer for the fall of the Islamic Republic.
And there is a very specific, almost funny detail about wind power in the text here.
Yes. The source says the new interim government will scrap the nuclear program completely. They just don't need it. They have massive oil reserves, and they have Jupiter-sized solar potential across their deserts.
Right.
But the source explicitly adds this little note. He says, we're skipping wind power on Trump's advice. because they cause cancer.
That is such a specific, wild call-out. It really shows exactly who the target audience for this manifesto is. He is trying to speak Trump's language directly.
It is absolute flattery with a strategic purpose. It signals political alignment. It basically says, we are listening to you, we are on your wavelength. It creates an instant rapport.
But the divorce is the other side of this diplomatic coin. To actually get the West on board, the source says Iran has to immediately cut all ties with its proxy networks.
Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. The source is very blunt about it. Divorce them. Just cut them off completely.
And the core logic there is economic, right?
Yes. The source asks, why threaten the UAE? Dubai is incredibly good for commerce.
You know, it frames regional peace, not just as some abstract moral good, but as a strict economic necessity. Why kill the hen that lays the golden eggs? If Iran really wants to be an economic trade hub, it simply can't be firing ballistic missiles at its best potential trading partners.
So we have the diaspora team, the new laws, the foreign policy pivot.
Yeah.
Now, how do we actually pull the trigger on all this? Section 6, the action plan.
The source identifies a very specific timeline, and it's centered around the month of Ramadan.
Why Ramadan specifically?
It's a period of naturally heightened religious and community focus. People are fasting, gathering in mosques, large family dinners.
So large gatherings are just normal.
Exactly. It makes it logistically much easier to mobilize huge numbers of people without triggering immediate suspicion. But more importantly, morally, it puts the regime in a terrible bind.
How so?
It is vastly harder for them to justify gunning down unarmed believers during the holiest month of the year. Now, the source fully acknowledges the regime has done terrible things before he mentions the 30,000 killed in the past.
But doing it during Ramadan raises the internal reputational costs significantly.
Yeah.
It forces the lower-level foot soldiers to really question the orders they're getting from the top.
And the primary method is nonviolent resistance.
Nationwide strikes, economic boycotts, massive university mobilizations. The core idea is to grind the entire country to an absolute halt.
To make the cost of maintaining the status quo much, much higher than the cost of just allowing a transition.
Yes. But then comes the ultimatum part. This heavily involves the U.S. again.
This is the hard power that backs up the soft power of the protests.
Exactly. The source argues the U.S. must officially publicly warn the regime. That message has to be, if you use lethal force against these peaceful protesters, the diplomatic talks are completely over and the military strikes begin.
And we should reiterate, these aren't strikes on the general population or infrastructure.
No. The source specifically emphasizes targeting regime assets. The decapitation strikes we mentioned earlier. It is designed to purely paralyze the command and control centers of the repression apparatus.
It's a massive, high-stakes game of chicken. The protesters have to move first, trusting that if the regime actually shoots, the U.S. will fulfill its promise and fire back.
It requires an immense amount of trust and deep coordination. The opposition on the ground takes the lead, but they absolutely need that air cover, both politically and literally, from the international community.
Let's look at the prize at the end of this rainbow, assuming it all works. Section 7, the economic vision. The source promises what he calls 100 hours to a new reality.
The economic upside is the ultimate carrot here. The source talks about achieving double-digit growth rates. We're talking 8 to 10% annually.
Is that actually realistic for them?
For a catch-up economy of that size, absolutely. Think about it. You have an advanced, educated economy that has been totally strangled by severe sanctions for decades. If you lift those sanctions almost overnight, stabilize the national currency, and just open the borders to normal global trade, you would see a massive, massive initial boom. The source basically treats Iran like a distressed asset in a giant venture capital portfolio.
Distressed asset. That is a very Wall Street way to look at a nation's revolution.
But it's accurate in this context. It has great bones, great infrastructure, highly educated workforce, massive natural resources, but it has terrible management.
Right.
If you change out the management and recapitalize the entire business, the overall valuation of the country skyrockets.
And the source talks specifically about reconnecting Tehran's tech scene with the rest of the world.
Yeah, imagine young Iranian software startups suddenly getting funding from Silicon Valley venture capitalists. Imagine the diaspora bringing all their saved capital and their global networks back home. It's a vision of Iran not as a sanctioned fortress, but as a bustling global hub.
And finally, there is a deep philosophical note to this source material that we definitely need to mention, the Satchidananda connection.
Yes, Bhagat weaves in some deep Vedantic philosophy here. Satchidananda translates roughly to truth, consciousness, and bliss.
That feels like a really sharp turn from talking about decapitation strikes and oil exports.
It definitely does. But it serves to ground the physical political struggle in a much deeper spiritual one. It suggests that liberation isn't just about voting or economics. It's about actively living in truth.
Because the regime relies so heavily on lies.
Exactly. Lies about the state of the economy, lies about their history, lies about religion itself. To live openly in truth is framed as the ultimate act of rebellion against them.
It adds this whole layer of moral inevitability to his argument.
It does. Glass breaks because it is rigid and fundamentally fake. Truth endures because it is real.
So let's bring it all together for the conclusion. We have unpacked a truly massive, sprawling strategy here today.
It's a very comprehensive chain of events. Step 1, organize the fragmented diaspora into one unified body.
Right.
Step 2, draft the interim constitution and appoint the shadow cabinet. Step 3, cut the grand bargain with Trump, Putin, and Xi. Step 4, launch the nonviolent revolution during Ramadan. Step 5, transition to the interim government and hold fair elections.
It sounds so simple and linear when you list it out like that, but in the real world, geopolitical friction is absolutely everywhere.
Of course it is. But the value of this source, the value of the Barack-based strategy, is that it actually has a concrete plan.
Yeah.
Most movements fail entirely because they know exactly what they are against, but they can never agree on what they're actually for. This strategy puts the what we are for on the table in extreme debatable detail.
And it really matters to you, the listener, because whether you are Iranian or not, this is basically a masterclass in how modern regime change theory works. It moves completely away from the 2003 model of a foreign invasion and moves towards a model of intense internal organization supported by very targeted external leverage.
It is the exact difference between smashing a building with a wrecking ball and carefully dismantling it from the inside out.
Here is the final provocative thought for everyone listening to chew on. The source essentially says that history rewards those who prepare. The glass giant is visibly cracking right now, today, February 24th, 2026.
The real question is, can a movement that is explicitly designed to appeal to Donald Trump's ego, Vladimir Putin's wallet, and the pure idealism of Iranian university students actually hold together in reality?
Right.
Or is the Barack-phase strategy just trying to thread way too many needles at the exact same time?
That is the ultimate gamble. But if it pays off, it literally changes the world overnight.
It would easily be the geopolitical shift of the century.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today.
Always a pleasure.
Just a quick reminder, our source material today was Barack Face, The Best Possible Strategy for Iran by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. We will be watching the news out of Tehran very, very closely. Stay tuned.
Stay safe.